morning, Tonja. It's so good to see all of your faces and to be with you this morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, I greet you in divine love because that's who I am and that's what I sense every time I come to Unity in Greensboro. And when you are not here, that energy has changed. It's never the same. So thank you for your presence. I am so moved, so moved. I want to talk to you this morning from the subject, time is at hand. And, you know, I probably have way more than we can get through this morning. But we'll see how it goes, okay? Now, because I want to have permission to take my time this morning. And I'd rather lean into it gently than to rush, okay? So wherever we get, we get. And if we just stop, we'll stop and pick it up at some other point, okay?
Okay. Yep.
Want to look at two texts this morning, one from the Old Testament, one from the New. The New Testament text is probably pretty familiar to you. It comes from, and I'm going to read Mark chapter 5 version. The actual account is the woman with the issue of blood. But it's found in Matthew and it's also in Luke. So in Mark, it's chapter 5, verses 25 through 34. And I'm going to read this morning from the New Revised Standard Version. Okay. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had. And she was no better, but grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately, her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately, Jesus was aware that power had gone forth from him. Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And the disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in and on you. How is it that you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." This particular account in Mark is actually couched between two healing scenarios. Jesus is on his way to heal Jairus' daughter. And for the sake of time, I'll just share for those that may be unfamiliar that Jairus is an authority figure in the synagogues, and his daughter is at the point of death. And they come, and he comes to ask Jesus would you come to heal my daughter? He agrees. And on the way to there, this woman interjects herself into the flow, into the healing energy. And Jesus, the historical Jesus, this being of compassion and presence, on his way to what seems to be an emergency, to everyone around, stops to attend to this woman. What a wonderful, wonderful display of compassion for the humanity of this woman. What I'd like to do is invite you to look this morning at this text from a pastoral perspective. The invitation is to remember. Remember, let it pass through the heart, that each one of us is a minister. We have been gifted and graced by God to give and receive love and to address in one's own unique way the needs and concerns of our loved ones, our respective communities, and dare we say even to contribute toward the healing of the world. So the invitation is to look at the text, import yourself into this action scene, into this healing energy, and think about what you may see. What comes into focus when we look at it as a ministering person? What do we see displayed in the compassionate acts of Jesus while he's on his way to there? What symbolic parallels of this story begin to emerge? When we hold in our heart the possibilities of God in our midst, the possibilities of God, and the responsibility or the calling of a community to watch over one another in love. If we consider it pastoral. When we think about it, we can see that, and I just want to raise some considerations because my hope is that you're thinking also that no doubt there are concerns for parents and grandparents about their children and grandchildren. If we look at it pastorally, that this parent's child is at the point of death. Now, if this were our spiritual community, if this scene were happening to people that we knew, what do we see? How is the historical Jesus responding? What do we see about the compassion of Jesus? In the text, it will lend itself to the fact that Jesus is compassionate. He's compassionate to parents, grandparents, to children. When we look at the woman, we can see that there is a reality of illness in this situation. There's a reality of isolation, of social alienation with this woman. Because the text is centered in a time where the hemorrhage would cause her to be ritually unclean. So she's on the outskirts. She's an outcast. She's on the margins. This woman can represent all the suffering that may be in our midst. If we look at the text pastorally and take within our heart that it didn't happen 2,000 years ago, but perhaps it's a movie reel that helps us see that right in the midst of where we may be going there, in the midst of being a programming church there, in the midst of hiring a new ministering person there, what's happening in our midst? What are the issues that are surfacing while we're on our way to there. What does the historical Jesus show us? That as we move about in our work, in our ministry, as we come together more and more concretely, more clearly as a spiritual community, what might be the messages that God is sending us about how we walk together, about how we demonstrate compassion while we're on our way to there. Let me jump to the end, all the way to the end of the message. If we were to consider that the time that we have been given right now together is time that is in real time. We're not practicing being children of God. We're not practicing necessarily that God is in our midst. God is in our midst. God is at work in what we're doing. God is informing us as we walk. God is concerned about the humanity of every person. And so it is the, I think, divine imperative that while we're on our way to there, that we put the lens on pastorally, so that when we look one to the other, that we're not so concerned about where we're going, that we don't see what's happening right in our midst. Perhaps the divine imperative is that, and later on we'll look at a scripture in Ecclesiastes that says, what we're doing, what will be already is. But we want to hold in creative tension the responsibility, pastorally, of watching over one another in love, and the possibility of what God is doing in our midst, in our homes, in our relationships, all of this action and movement. There's a healing happening with this woman on the way to a healing with a dead child who is really not dead. Jesus says she's sleeping. But in the natural eye, the situation is dead. That's another message. I'm not going to do that. We don't have time. So, the questions arise for me pastorally. What is the energy of prayer that's actually at work here? And someone that may be new to the spiritual journey might even say, well, have some questions about healing. Does it always happen instantaneously, immediately? Is that the energy that's always released? There's something happening right there at the moment with the woman and Jesus, right at that point of contact. Did you catch it in the text that immediately her issue, she felt in her body that her issue had ended, that the flow of the hemorrhage dried up. And immediately, Jesus senses that power goes forth from him. I believe that the exchange of power creates dialogue, creates possibility. The exchange of power and presence helps us hold in creative tension the responsibilities that we have to watch over one another in love, right in the midst of our own vicissitudes of life, right in the midst of global concerns, global warming, and whatever else is happening in the spheres. While we're on our way to there, you can interject yourself into this. While you're on your way to that new position, while you're on your way to moving to a different location, while you're on your way to waiting for a child to get out of prison, while you're on your way to put your own there in it, while you're on your way to, I give you permission, just leave the space and think about where you're on your way to. While you're on your way, we're not released, I believe, for the responsibility of watching over one another, for being aware of what is happening in our midst. Even as we engage the stranger, even as we practice divine hospitality. I like what one writer says. He says that hidden in this tale is a flash of precious intimacy between two human beings who are socially very distant from each other. Their scandalous touch does not yield the anger and alienation one might expect. Rather, it brings wholeness. It brought healing. It brought peace. You know, when we talk about the energy of prayer and what really is at work, when prayer is happening, in this divine exchange, when power is moving between one another. Larry Dorsey in Thich Nhat Hanh's book on the energy of prayer said about prayer, and this is his favorite quote by Sir Arthur Eddington, is that something unknown is doing we don't know what. Beautiful. I mean, that's just the reality of what is happening. It's the reality of what is happening. Jesus exercises his authority and his power gently in direct relationship with those who come by faith. For him, those that are on the margins, those that are outcasts. This is, if you know anything about the historical Jesus, those who may be feeling isolated, may be trying to find their particular place in their own historical journey. Jesus has great compassion, that same presence. I see God like in you. I see Christ as you. Resides and abides, rules, can rule within you. Right? Right. So while we're on our way to there, what are the issues that are right in front of us? What might be God calling us to do as a community to make sure that we're strong when we get to there and not separated, not divided. That God has so worked within us that the task of becoming who we are doesn't get between us. While we're voting, while we're sharing concerns, and while we're doing all that has to be done, that God is center, that God in us is illuminating all that we do, right in the midst of our own concerns. I can't leave here. I want to please, I want you to hear it in the way that resonates with you. Fix it if you need to fix it. Because every time we come in, we've got the responsibility and the possibilities and the energy moving, that when we leave, we don't have to be the same. That immediately something can happen. There can be a transference. There can be an exchange of power. Ephesians 5:15 and 16 helps make my point of this divine imperative. It says, see that you walk circumspectly on the earth, day to day. Be careful how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making most of the time. Be careful how you live. Really in the literal, it's see how you live. See how you live. Discern, perceive. Turn the thoughts and direct the mind to consider and contemplate the weight of life. And how important it is that, like Mary Oliver says, that you think contemplatively about what you'll do with this one wild and crazy life. Perhaps the divine imperative is to remember that upon your arrival, you came with two passports. One with the kingdom of God, entrance, the other, the kingdom of humanity. You're welcome in both. Yes? You're welcome. Let me tell you where the title came from, and then we'll make a couple of points, and then we'll be done. I was praying about the invitation to be with you, and I had a dream. Now, as you know, dreams have many layers of meaning. So I'm just going to give you one invitation that led me this way. You may hear something else. But in the dream, I saw the spiritual community and I saw the clock that I'm watching very carefully, so we make good use of the time. And some well-intentioned person had set the clock an hour ahead. And, I thought, well, perhaps it was to create a sense of urgency about the hour. I don't know. Or perhaps he or she was overwhelmed with anticipation about the future. So someone within the community brought this to my attention and asked me to reset the clock. So I got a two-step stool, got up, and set the clock back to the current hour, but set the minute hand 10 minutes fast. Just as a reminder that it's so important that we stay grounded in the hour, responsibility, and hold this sense of eternity, possibility, and the divine intention together in this creative tension that just kind of, how the Spirit, we talked last time about the Spirit pressuring us from within to evolve in every circumstance of life. Okay. So, in Proverbs 29:18, it says, where there is no vision, the people perish. Where there is no divine communication, where there is no liberative revelation of God, people perish. And in that context, perish means to cast off restraint. It means that we just kind of do whatever seemeth right in our own eyes. It just means that there is this letting go. So, if that is the case, what do we do? How now shall we live? 5 more minutes. Can you hang in there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Ecclesiastes 3, verses 11 and 15. God has planted eternity in the human heart and mind, a divinely implanted sense of a purpose working through the ages. That which is already has been, that which is to be already is. Father Keating, teacher of Centering Prayer, love him, said the creation is not a one-time event, but a continuous movement that is comprehensive, it is loving, and which is calling us to ever deeper participation and penetration of the divine mystery, the ultimate source of what is. One more. Jeremiah 6:16 says, stand at the crossroads and look, and ask for the eternal paths, then walk in it, and you will find rest for your soul. You'll find the right or the best route for your soul. What if the spiritual journey this spiritual life, that which animates each of our existence. It's really about receiving the invitations of God, of self, one's own soul, and others. What if the spiritual life is about the spirit of reciprocity, where there is exchange of power on a continual basis, where there is deep trust and dependence on the divine other, not as a separate self, but as a relationship of shared power? What if the spiritual life is about reverence? A reverence for all of life, where there is a penetrating love that has the capacity to cast out all fear. What if the spiritual life is really about receiving, not work, reciprocity, not a lot of effort and lack, shared love? What if it's about God in our midst, God helping us every day, God showing us? What if the invitation is to really own your personal power as a ministering person, as one gifted and graced by God, to do the will of God, to seek that which is for your highest good, to love each other so much that you want more for them than they maybe want for themselves, which would drive you to prayer? What if it's about not so much where we're going, but what we do in the midst of where we're going? What if where we're going already is? That's really not our concern so much as to leave the details up to the universe, to allow this deep trust, this shared power, sense of purpose, lack of fear, so loved that a lack of fear in all its manifestations and respects allows you to live fearlessly. I saw a billboard the other day with a little, he couldn't have been, it was a little boy, he could not have been more than 5, with a Batman kind of thing on and a cape, and he had his hands up, and he said, and the billboard said, "Live fearlessly." All right. And I thought about this penetrating love, the invitations that we have, all that we've been given, that allows us to be and to do all that God would have us do, not in our own strength, but as one. As one, connected to a greater reality, as one. My prayer is that may we be open to the next step, that we fear nothing, that we love as if it's our last step on the earth, and that in your incarnation you are fully resolved, that you have invitation in this life, the next, and that we are companioned with a divine presence that enables us far beyond what we can see and know fully, but that we are invited to experience as often and as deeply as we possibly can. So as I see the Christ in you, be who you are becoming.